There's a great conversation on YouTube. I think it's from 2007. It's all of the prominent new atheists discussing all different issues, and they stumble upon a big issue which really highlights the debate that's going on today between progressives and atheists on the issue of Islamophobia. So you're going to hear Sam Harris ask a question here, and then Hitchens and Dawkins' response may surprise you.
Do you feel there's any burden we have as critics of religion to be even-handed in our criticism of religion, or is it fair to notice that there's a spectrum of religious ideas and commitments, and Islam is on one end of it, and the Amish and the Jains and others are on another, and there are real differences here that we have to take seriously?
My concern is actually not so much with the evils of religion as whether it's true.
Yeah.
And I really do. I mean, I care passionately about that. The fact of the matter is there, as a matter of fact, a supernatural creator in this universe. And I really care about that. And so, although I also care about the evils of religion, I am prepared to be even-handed because they all make this claim, which seems to me equally. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I would never give up the claim that all religions are equally false. And for that reason, because they're false by preferring faith to reason, latently at least equally dangerous.
But equally false, but surely not quite equally dangerous because of...
No, latently I think so, because
latently maybe,
because of the surrender of the mind.
Yeah.
The surrender of the mind,
Yeah.
the eagerness to discard the only thing that we've got that makes us higher primates, the faculty of reason.
So that's really interesting because oftentimes the new atheists are slammed by many progressives, especially like Salon, for example. They always have articles about this stuff, where they say that, well, these new atheists in the movement, the problem with them is that they single out Islam and they attack Islam much more fervently than they do any other religions, which shows more bigotry and intolerance than it shows, rational discourse. That's the way the argument goes. And when Sam Harris poses that question, I should note for the record here that he kind of goes on to say, well, look, I think we should criticize certain religions in a harsher way than other religions because I think certain religions lead to worse outcomes than other religions. So Sam Harris does maintain the position that, yes, in fact, you should crack down more on certain religions, specifically Islam. And the other guys kind of disagree with him. Hitchens and Dawkins kind of disagreed with him, which is interesting because people would think that Hitchens and Dawkins would agree with Harris on that point, and he doesn't agree with Harris on that point. Now, what do I think makes sense on this? I actually think they're both right. So let me explain what I mean by that. So should atheists, or do atheists have a responsibility to be even-handed in their critique of all religions? That's the question that's on the table. And my answer is yes and no. So yes, in the sense that Hitchens and Dawkins mentioned there, which is that all the religions are equally false. So yes, in that respect, whether you're talking about Islam, you're talking about Christianity, you're talking about Hinduism, you're talking about some religion you and I have never even heard of. These religions, if they talk about supernatural entities and they talk about things that are physically impossible, yet they're all false. So you should essentially spend equal time on them and say, well, here's why this one's false, here's why that one's false, and you're not singling out any one to be so-called worse than another one. So from that perspective, I agree with Hitchens and Dawkins. Yes, they're all equally false, and talk about it in that respect. And also, I agree with a great point that Hitchens made there, where he said, look, they all have the same potential to be dangerous and to lead to murder and savagery and all this stuff. And I think how did they describe it? Latently? Or I think that's the word they use. They have the latent potential for all that. So in other words, sure, as of today, Buddhism may statistically be less dangerous than other religions, but just the idea that you've sold out your mind to this doctrine which makes no sense and to this religious group, that means that there's always the potential, even in the name of Buddhism, to be violent and act in ways that are inhuman, like, by the way, some of them are doing in Myanmar right now. So that's another point that they make, which is fantastic. The idea that regardless of what the facts are today, in terms of which religions, in the name of certain religions, are more violent or less violent, they all have the same potential to lead to violence and genocide, and many times they have, right? Because you're not buying into reason, you're not buying into rationality, you're selling out to a dogmatic grouping of ideas, list of ideas that are put forth in a holy book, and that's just silly. So those are two great points, and on those fronts, they're right. You should equally discuss all these different religions. But the area where I would agree slightly with Sam Harris, and where I think he has a point, is you certainly can empirically, at any point in time, describe the differences between certain religions. Now, a lot of progressives don't like it when you do that, because then it really appears like you're saying this religion's worse than that religion. If you say, hey, look, man, as of today, here's where the real problems lie. You know, it's less with Buddhism, it's more with Islam, and it's more with Christianity. And I think it's an uncomfortable thing to discuss, but I also think it's true. And what I mean by that is, you're right to say that, you know, it's likely the case that when it comes to the issue of child fucking, child rape, on that one, the Catholics are the worst. The Catholics are the worst when it comes to the issue of child fucking. The Catholics are way worse than, I don't know, the people who believe in Scientology on the issue of child fucking. Okay, that's just statistically likely true. But at the same time, you can say on the issue of apostasy, today Islam is the worst. You're allowed to say these things, and these things are true, and to try to say that bringing those things up today is bigotry I think that's silly, and you're really doing a disservice to the actual concept of bigotry and intolerance. Because there's real bigotry in the world, there's real intolerance of the world, and an empirical description of what's happening in reality is not those things. Truth is always a defense, as they say in court. But the final thing I'll mention is, I'm not sure how helpful that is. You know what I mean? And again, I do believe truth is always a defense. But I'm not sure how helpful it is to even empirically describe the problems with some religions over other religions today, because then I think people, get their guard up, and it's like you've given them license to disagree with you on everything else when you act like that. You know what I mean? Like, there was an article in Salon today about Bill Maher, and they were like, the making of a 2014 villain, Bill Maher. It's like, yeah, Salon, the person who agrees with you on 90% of issues, that's the person who's the real villain. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's a reality that people respond in that tribal way, where since Bill Maher criticizes Islam more than other religions, he's viewed as an Islamophobe, and no, he's a bad, intolerant bigot on that issue, and don't listen to anything else he says because of that. So since that's the way that a lot of people think, it might be the right strategy for people to not single out Islam over other religions when it comes to certain empirical areas today where Islam is worse and more violent. You see what I mean? But again, look, overall, I've always been, you guys know me, I've always been somewhat conflicted on this, and I've always been in the 50-50 camp, where I agree half the time with progressives and half the time with the new atheists on this issue of Islamophobia. So I am conflicted on this, but in summation, I think they're right that, yes, talk about how all religions are equally false, because they are. They all are not based on rationality and looking at evidence. They're not. So they're all equally false. They all have the same equal potential to be dangerous, right? And history shows that. And the one area where you can make distinctions, although I don't know how helpful it is to do that, is this idea of differences in empirical reality today. That it's true that on the issue of child fucking, Catholics are worse, and on the issue of apostasy, Muslims are worse. You can bring that up, you can discuss that. Truth is always a defense, but I just don't know how helpful that is in the discussion to convert people to our side.